All right, so we can jump right in. We were talking last week about Melissodes males, and now, and we, scratched the surface. And after the end of the recording, we jumped in a little bit with, I think, Joan about trinodis versus agilis. And then I was looking at some specimens today.
Honey, do you need to go to the bedroom?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
We have some interesting differences. So in Mike's worldview, you separate the male agilis and trinodis. One of the things would be on whether there's a maculation or a yellow patch on the mandible. And in my worldview, at least trinodis, which is the dominant species on the east, also has this yellow maculation. So anyway, I don't know where we're going to go and try and figure this out, but it is one of these mysteries, because I've struggled with trinodis versus agilis for a while. I think because of these identification issues that not conforming to some of the Western species. So let me switch my let me share my screen actually right now. So we are there. And there, I think you guys can see now my screen and my very usually dirty fingers. So here's this lovely Melissodes. You can, if you're doing vein traps, or even on the ground, blue traps seem to attract these in large numbers sometimes, or if you're net collecting too. But there can be quite a few of them. This is what I would call trinodis. So in these same areas that I'm getting this, these males, I'm also getting a whole lot of females that are easier, at least for me, and this is something to figure out, identify as trinodis. But the thing is that in Mike's key, and this is where we get into like, and we figure this out, in Mike's key, a specimen like this would key towards the agilis side of the book, because it's got this lovely big, which I'm going to zoom in on here, this lovely big yellow patch. It is not subtle, yellow patch on the mandible. And so in Mike's key, this would key to agilis, but in my, I think I have this on Discover Life too. In my book, these are trinodis out here. So Mike, are you back on?
I am, sorry.
Yeah. So go ahead. So what we're looking at is a specimen, and we can look at this, and we can look at female things that I'm calling air quote trinodis right now. But you can see it's got this big yellow patch on there. So maybe you should summarize the differences between agilis and trinodis from your perspective, and then we can look at some of these specimens and see what's, why are we getting these differences, at least in the yellow patch thing. And maybe that they just have yellow patches on the East Coast and not in the Midwest, but we need to figure this out, because there's a lot of them.
Can you back up and can you show the wings?
Yep. So.
Oh, good. That's good.
All right.
Focus. And magnify if you can.
You want me to jump in here?
Yeah.
So I believe in your guide, agilis has got lighter veins and trinodis.
Lighter veins, but and then no dark hairs on the tergites.
Uh-huh.
And when we're not talking big obvious dark hairs, we're talking very small hairs, basal to the white fascia.
Right. And this is something, again, when you're looking at
that I see dark hairs right there.
Yeah. Okay, so this is I think because
and dark veins. I mean, I would call, based on the wings and the tergite. Sorry to interrupt you right now. I mean, that looks like trinodis to me.
Okay, and it matches, and we'll throw in, even though we're not talking about females, it matches the females, which we get. So mid-Atlantic area, most of that clade, I would say, is trinodis by, many more. In fact, I'm not even quite sure at this point what is agilis in the East. Okay. And because I can look at the females and I'm like, what's going on? Like, I'm identifying tons of female trinodis, but using your key, and I don't know about Mitchell, but it's, these should not be trinodis because they have the yellow maculation, or is it, but all the other things sort of match. So it may.
What do and that's funny because I've never seen that combination of characters that you're showing right here in the Midwest. I mean, I've never seen a trinodis with yellow on the base of the mandible. Hey, especially not a big spot like that. I mean, you can't miss that.
Yeah, literally hundreds of these things. So why don't I'll throw up a, from the same region, the Mid-Atlantic. Let me throw up a female trinodis and see if that strikes you differently. Let's see, which one was I going to look at here? So here's a female, and again, often I am looking at the T4 as so. Often there's a presentation, again, in my book, of a general, in a fresh specimen, generally rusty. In fact, I think one of the old names was rustica, if I remember right, for this group. Generally rusty hairs to off-white when it starts fading on the thorax and head, and all those hairs are light colored. There's no dark hairs in there. And that kind of necks it down to this, usually to this agilis trinodis group. And then, while not the cleanest specimen, the pattern, I think, is basically here, which is mostly on T4 here. This is almost all brown hairs along the rim. There can be scattered paler hairs, but you basically have a rim colored with a dark brown. Mike, what do you think on looking at this?
Well, it's certainly not agilis, females, at least not the way I understand it. And what we now call druriellus, which used to be called rustica.
That's the one. Okay.
Yeah. I'd have to focus in a little bit more on, but just based on what I see, it could be. And now, okay, that's good. Okay, that looks like a trinodis female to me.
Yeah. Sorry.
No dark hairs on anywhere except on the tergites, and maybe a few maybe on the vertex sometimes.
Druriellus, not that we want to go too far, maybe down the female. We can look at the males because that's what we're supposed to be concentrating on. But in Druriellus, I usually see dark hairs along the anterior face of the. This would be light, but there's a line. Often, if you get a crappy specimen that's matted down, you can't see them very well. But there's dark hairs on the mesopisternum area.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a Druriellus that didn't have dark hairs on the thorax.
I believe. Yeah, and I think they also have, on the vertex, particularly a rough at the very back of black.
Yep, and often a lot.
Yeah.
At least in the Midwest.
Very dark hairs too, not the boltoniae subtle things. But if you look at this specimen, this is what I would call this classic group of everything's light in the females. Light hair, light hair, light hair.
Yep.
Light hair, and then you would look at back here, and the females, it's like, oh, clearly trinodis. Again, I'm just like thrown off by this maculation thing, which seems, well, I don't know. No, variable.
And do the majority of those things that have maculations also have, you know, dark hairs on the tergites and the males now?
Yeah.
So they otherwise they match trinodis except for the maculation.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I don't know. I think it was Joan after we signed off last week mentioned that there was some DNA evidence that might indicate a third species. I'll just say between agilis and trinodis, and I don't know. That's all I don't know any more than that. I hadn't heard of that before, but maybe.
All right. So,
folks, can you repeat which had the dark hair behind the head on the female?
Well, a number of things do, but we were talking about druriellus at the moment, which used to be called rustica.
Yeah, that was my mistake for even mentioning rustica. I just think of trinodis as having rusty hair, and for some reason that old name, that's not even a valid name anymore for anything. But I do think of, like, here's another male and that trinodis clade, and you can see, like in agilis, I would say, and Mike, what do you think, that this would be a much brighter white, and you wouldn't have that sort of near orange color?
No, some agilis do.
Oh, they do.
Okay. Yeah, and that and it varies. And I used to think it was a result of, you know, how long they've been flying, and I think that has something to do with it. But I definitely see both the males and female of things that I call agilis that sometimes have hair that looks similar to that, and even darker in some cases.
Right. Or is it one of these sneaky other third species yellow maculation things? So I guess we'll all have to, as a community, we need to start looking at our trinodis agilis groupings, and it would be interesting to find where there's a transition.
Yeah, and in some of the males and some of the females, as we talked about last week, the condition of the galea, whether it's bright and shiny or dull, can be helpful. But using that character between to separate agilis and trinodis it's not consistent, and it doesn't work. And the same for the genitalia in the males. It's just you know, in Laberge's figures, there among some of the sternites, there seems to be slight differences, but I've never found anything that convinced me that the genitalia or sternite 7 or 8 are very informative.
Yeah,
I could be wrong, but I haven't seen it.
Sam, what do you have on screen right now?
So this is trinodis, and I'm while you guys are talking, I'm looking at my agilis box, and I'm thinking, you know, because these are all from the mid-Atlantic, that these are possibly all trinodis. You know, because I was, you know, in a faded specimen. I'll pull something here in a second. It's got some nice tongue characters to show the more other characters. Well, let me pull.
Something else we haven't mentioned, at least in the Midwest, that's different between most trinodis and agilis males, is the tergal margins in most agilis males are quite clear.
Yeah.
And lighter colored than in trinodis.
So yeah, let's contrast that with a specimen, I'm going to say, of something that I have, that I put an agilis note on. So here you can see what Mike's talking about. So these are this is, you know, a lot of Melissodes don't really have this amount of translucent edges to the tergites. But here you can see that there's a brown cast. Now you have to be a little bit careful because they're translucent enough that you are also looking at the through them at the tergites below. But if you rock them back and forth, you'll get that picture. Now I'm going to switch to something that I have labeled as agilis, which is from Maryland. And again, now I'm losing confidence in this. First of all, let's look at the wing edges and see how old this thing is, just in case it's super faded. But they're that's a fresh specimen.
Brand new, yep.
But here are the tergites. So I think this has had a big influence on me, and we can look to see if we have dark hairs in calling this agilis. But those, again, a little bit difficult to see here, but let me just vary this.
Yeah, can you turn it sideways?
Okay. Yeah, and we can look for dark hairs too. And then do you have any differences in terms of floral preferences between trinodis and agilis? I know agilis, I think of them as like sunflower, you know.
Yeah, they love, all the ligulate composites. I mean, particularly sunflower, but I find them in other things as well, particularly the males. I mean, males may show up in any kind of Asteraceae.
Right. But here, I'm not really seeing.
Yeah, I didn't see in your image. I don't see any dark hairs.
Yeah.
But I don't. Maybe I don't know. I can't tell very well.
What about trinodis? I know I've collected them off of plants a bunch of times, but I don't have a vibe as to how they divide up the world.
You mean the plant world?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I see them in the Midwest in flight at the same time at the same plants.
Yeah.
So in the same habitats. I mean, they could be in anybody's backyard. They could be on the side of the road. They could be in a native prairie. They show up all over the place.
Yeah. So this does meet those criteria. And if we look, though, also on the mandible here, I think this also has a yellow spot. Oops. Yeah, there we go.
And those wing veins approach what I would call the LaBerge call them red, but they're kind of a peach color maybe, or honey color. They're not dark in the sense of dark brown. So I mean, that looks to me like that could well be agilis male, based on the way your images are coming across. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. So I think in some, I think we meet all the criteria for separating these, except for the mandible thing.
Yeah, that's weird.
And Joan mentioned this third thing potentially being in there, which could be involved. Wouldn't it be great if it was just as simple as like presence or absence of a yellow maculation in there? But I don't know. I don't know what this deal is. But
I have 4 questions to interrupt you with.
Okay.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Earlier you said the tergal margins were quite clear between one, or more clear than the other. Can you say that again?
Right.
Or were you just meaning like the rims are more translucent, or what did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think what we mean is, and this is true of both the females and the males, the tergal margins, and really those margins end up being a third of the length of the tergite, maybe more. In agilis, those are very clear in that you would not say there's a brown tint or tinge to them. They're both in both species they're translucent. It's just that in agilis they're much more clear, and in trinodis there is a brownish tinge to them.
Right.
Okay, so just to be clear, in Discover Life we use the term rim in there if anybody is relying on Discover Life for those terms. Yeah,
so that's a terminology thing. So rim, just in our book, is just the edge of the tergite. And then there's all kinds of things from graduluses to depressed areas to that bellish.
Yeah, apical areas is another way that I refer to those areas of the tergites in agilis and trinodis that are translucent. And apical areas, I don't know. I'm not sure how that's described in Discover Life,
yeah.
But apical areas vary from quite narrow to quite broad, and usually there's a separation on the tergite. It could be a line, it could be an impressed line, it could be a very faint line that separates the basal area from the apical area.
Yeah.
And they're perfect. That's a good enough shot to show it. You're seeing those pale translucent margins.
Yeah.
Or I mean, apical areas.
Right.
Just we all get like a bunch of terms that we might know are being used to describe that. Okay, so thank you for that. Eric asks, how often do the abdomen hairs get rubbed off? And that question also applies to the Clypeus.
The older the specimen, the more likely it is to, and like you can see those tattered wings there. In most bees, that's an indication of how long they've been in flight. And now it's not, you can't measure number of days, but the older the bee gets, the more beat up it gets, and the more things get worn off and tattered. And
so I brought this one up. This is one that I had in the Agilis box, and it's also
2 questions, just so you know.
Oh, okay. Go ahead with the questions.
Okay. Lisa has a note, and I don't know if it's a question. I have in my notes that apical tergites differ in males and females of Trinodis and Agilis. I don't know if we need some more clarity on that, Lisa, if that's a question. Yeah.
So in the males, they're much wider and they present as this translucent rim. In the females, I'm not even sure if there is a translucent rim. We can look, but it's shorter and there's a lot more hair down there. They're quite different.
Okay. Yep. She says that you covered it with that first question. And the last question is, do they prefer only plants in the Asteraceae family or also other late summer fall bloomers?
Yes, late summer fall bloomers. I mean, Sylphie, if you wanted to go out and find them, you would go to Helianthus. But if you look at all the collection records, there's many other yellow Asteraceae flowers they visit, and also asters. So they might be found at any of those late summer, early fall Asteraceae, but primarily Helianthus.
And
that's my opinion.
Yeah. So particularly for Agilis, I think of that, but a lot of times it's just they're really obvious there. The other notion is that the males are probably drinking from a broader range of plants. So the obligateness here is of where do you get your pollen and what do you feed your babies? So that always is in need of exploration. So I just want to point out on this one, this is in my Agilis box, but it's not absolutely clear. Like this one, the rims still have a little bit of a warm brown to them. So it's not like translucent and clear absolutely versus a darker brown. It's more like clear to light brown. This is why it's irritating, right? Clear to light brown versus a much darker brown. But I think the looking for the dark hairs on the tergites, and you're going to want to do this for lots of species too. There's other groups where the presence of the dark hairs in this area, usually you're looking at T2, this is I think T3 here, behind the white hairband, which most of them have. So this area right here, again, looking sideways, because it's a lot of times it's not obvious, but looking sideways and looking, are these hairs dark or light? And sometimes whether the hairs, if there's not here, sometimes in the females, you might even look for light or dark hairs in the unpitted rim or the pitted rim. A lot of times hairs come out of pits. So, yeah, a lot of time under the scope looking at these things.
Yeah, for what it's worth, in Laberge's description of the male trinodis, he does mention that there is occasionally yellow. Well, rarely. He says rarely, I think, on male trinodis mandibles.
Okay. So it may be simply that, over the Appalachians, the predominant mode is yellow. And in the Midwest, where, of course, he was in Illinois, so he was getting most of his specimens from the Midwest. Maybe it's not yellow, and maybe it's just a little variation, or maybe it's a third species.
Yeah, on his maps, and again, this is 70 years ago and older. On his maps, agilis, there are more dots in the east of agilis than there are trinodis. It's interesting.
So I think that was one of the things that really confused me initially, because I had this expectation that I was going to find mostly agilis and not so much trinodis. But I can tell you now, and particularly this is really helpful because of the dot issues. It's like, I think almost certainly trinodis is the really dominant, and there's very few agilis. Now, maybe that's some kind of shift, but it also is perhaps a reflection that if you're using yellow on the mandibles, maybe you very quickly assume that all those trinodis might have been agilis or something. I don't know how does he separate? I haven't looked at his key here beforehand. What's his separation of the agilis trinodis in his dichotomous key group? Or maybe someone could look that up while we're going along.
Dark hairs on the abdomen is part of it.
Okay.
I've got it here somewhere.
Yeah, too. We can let someone else out there.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
I will say, Sam, though, in the Midwest, trinodis and agilis seem equally commonly collected. I wouldn't say one's more abundant than the other.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting.
Right. I kind of think we need to revisit the East again, this side of the Appalachians, in terms of really going through collections and other things to get a handle on these two.
We have a summary in the chat that we want to confirm.
Okay.
On the notes that just went through, since there was a lot of flipping back and forth. Agilis has more clear tergal margins. Trinodis has brownish tint to the tergal margins. Agilis has no dark hair on the tergites. Trinodis has some dark hair behind that white band. And the mandible color differs between the East Coast and Midwest, so don't rely on it.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, reasonable.
But you could with what we'll do in Discover Life here today is modify it and mention that the mandibular spot appears to be absent in the Midwest on trinodis and is largely present in the mid-Atlantic area, and then everything else is murky. But yes, I think the dark hairs are probably the best character on the tergites.
Yeah, one caveat there. If you pull the abdomen, telescope it out to its extreme, at the extreme base on the tergites, I'm not sure if all of them, of agilis, there are some brownish hairs that are usually not visible because you don't pull the tergites out to that extreme, and so you don't usually see them. But you just need to be aware that if you pull things out extremely, at the very base, you will see some very short, dense, brownish hairs on agilis. But ordinarily, you never see those because the tergites are not naturally exposed like that.
Yeah.
That probably shouldn't have said that, but.
Well, you are an
always modeling it up there.
All right.
There's always exceptions.
Mike, do you have?
That's a key. That's the most important thing that's been said today.
Mike, do you want to have a particular one we want to jump to next? Might as well do some nearby. I mean, do you have a preference? Because I'm going to pull some of the other specimens.
Let's see, what did you have there? I don't have your list in front of me.
You know what? I've got to return a bunch of specimens to the University of Minnesota that were that group that I had. So let's show those.
Okay.
Which is wheeleri, and these are good because they're uncommon. Wheeleri, bidentis, and boltoniae. Do you have any preferences for any of those?
No. I mean, boltoniae in the Midwest is probably more common, definitely more common than bidentis and wheeleri, and is also really can be pretty variable.
Mm-hmm. So here's one with this tongue sticking out, so we can actually take a look.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Shag
Here's
green.
one. What?
Oh, boltoniae. Sorry. Good job, Claire.
Confirming male.
It is a male. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So see, so my my usual look at this is the bases often can move towards shiny and chagrined. So this down here is this sort of reptilian, scaly, chagrining, tessellated, are all these very difficult, not in the English language. You can see on the upper galea here too, very different. So the base gives you an idea of what smooth would be, and then down here is where you look, is at the tips, which is mostly what's visible when they're closed anyway. And you can see it's not really reflecting light. You can see all the light reflected up at the upper part, and then it disappears, right? Because I'm at my max magnification.
Okay.
So that's a good.
Well, I will say in the Midwest, for boltoniae, it varies a lot.
Oh.
So that's not. I mean, it is often like that, but sometimes it's more shiny, more dull, and I haven't been able. And there's some other people. Laura Anker, who's also worked on these things. Boltoniae, in terms of the tessellation and shininess of the galea, it's too variable to be relied upon.
Okay.
At least that's. Sorry.
Having said that, we're wondering if that shiny, chagrined continuum there is true for females too.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And for some species of Melissodes, that condition of the galea is consistent and very useful as a diagnostic character to some extent, but in others it isn't. And boltoniae is one of those where, at least in my experience, it varies enough to be, can drive you crazy if you try to rely on it. So.
Yeah. Those darn Melissodes.
I got to step away for 1 second.
So what you're looking at on screen is a character that you almost always have to address when looking at Melissodes, which is you have the scutum. So we're looking at, here's the back of the head, and see, these hairs are all light. I'm pretty sure. We can go back and look. So usually good character groups are what's the color of the hairs coming out from both the back of the head and behind the ocelli, so the vertex, in other words. And then here's roughly, there's the tegula, here's roughly the scutum, and you get this pattern an awful lot. So the pattern is, and here's the scutellum back here. So this is the abdomen starting in there, which is like in the specimens we saw just a second ago, which are all about light hairs and completely light hairs on the scutum and everywhere else. And that actually narrows it down quite nicely to that, usually that trinodis agilis crowd. And then you have a bunch of others. And so here is a very common pattern, which is there are dark hairs in the middle, or at least in the, let's say, the rear 3/4 of the scutum. And then the scutellum almost always has dark hairs when it has this pattern, dark hairs in the center of the scutellum, and everything is lined around the edges with light colored hairs. These hairs here are relatively dark. Sometimes the first glance at this kind of some of these specimens, either it's faded out or it's just naturally that way. And we can try and pull a couple more specimens. This is actually much lighter in color. But again, looking from the side helps you decide whether you have dark hairs. A lot of what goes on is that seemingly so these are all very finely branched, is that the branches can lighten up, but the hair shaft almost always remains dark. If you have any other enlightenment there, Mike, on hair.
No, but there are, you know, you'd say this, but there are both, and LaBerge mentions this in his descriptions. Boltoniae is one of those species that in the male, it can be pale, and it can be dark, and it can be in between.
Yeah.
So it can be, it's a difficult species to learn, and it's best if you collect a long series. Usually it's easy to understand that variation. But it drove me crazy for quite a while when I started learning these things. Well, there's a good shot. There's a very important shot of the F1 in Boltoniae. It's very, very short, and that separates Boltoniae and from a number of other things. So that short F1.
Yeah, let's do that right now. So get in your. Go ahead, Claire.
Or we can come back to this, but we want to see the top view of the scutum dark hair situation lined with light hair. And Andrew, this applies to Boltoniae and what else? I'm sorry, I was managing things and I don't know which character that referred to, if you could clarify.
Many species have a dark hair patch in the center like this. You know, illatus, subillatus come to mind, but yeah, a whole clade of them. So it's much more common than all light. All light is a relatively uncommon thing. That's why you can kind of zoom right in. So that's what it looks like from above. So you can see that in some ways the dark hairs are hidden or more difficult to see because they just blend in with the black integument. Like,
how about check the white balance? It's pretty glary.
Okay. Whoa. I think
I've never seen that one before.
Yeah, I think it's confused by the light here. I have all the labels on. I think it's part of the problem. Let's see if we can do this again. Maybe not. But yeah, I think the point here is that often the dark hairs are not immediately obvious when you look straight down because they blend with the integument, whereas the white hairs stand out. And so the same would be true, like when we talk about the hairs on the tergites in the males. What you have there are relatively short hairs, right? These are, when we were looking at it from the side, these were relatively long hairs on the top. And if we look, let's go to the male here. So now we have Boltoniae, and I forget, I think they have dark hairs, right? On the tergites. We'll find out. Or maybe that's wheeleri.
Oh, actually. Oh,
so if we look at the upper part, let me just change the angle here a little bit more. So again, the way to look at for dark hairs is from the side, almost always. So you can see dark hairs in there, but you could also see how they aren't super obvious because they're relatively short. And when we look from above, it'll look like it's just all light colored hairs. You have to get really thick amount of black hairs for that to show up from above. Let's switch back to the antenna. I want you guys to take a look here, like Mike was saying, at the relative length of F1. And we're going to go look at the pedicel, relationship to the pedicel. Let me angle it a little bit more. and the pedicel and to F2. So again, I'm going to point this out here. Oops.
Yeah, that's short F1, which by short we mean, you know, it's only its length is only half its width,
yep,
or even less on the short side, and that immediately rules out a lot of other similar species like bidentis, like rustica, like a number of others. So F1 does not get much shorter than that in any other species. It's similar in a few other species, but yeah, that's short. When we say short, that's short.
It's hard to see the pedicel. I think it's a little bit recessed, but it's about the size of the pedicel or even a little bit lower. And then look at, this is more of a measurement thing, but you can get a visual gander. And now we're going to switch to bidentis to show you a contrast.
Longer. Yeah.
And thing. And I don't know what wheeleri has, but
short, very short.
Very short. Wheeleri is not one we have in the east at all, I don't think, the Far East.
Yeah, I don't think it shows up on any maps. It's not uncommon in the Midwest. It shows up in a lot of places.
Get a little bit of a better shot here. All right, we're going to look at the lower one, and I'll zoom in a little bit more here at max power. But here, you can see that this is, you know, almost equal to the width, and then much greater than the pedicel. And then if you were to measure this ratio, that is a lot.
I call it a fifth, 1/5 is what I call it. And in boltoniae, it's 1/8 or even shorter. And I know we're kind of like splitting hairs, but I mean, this is a good demonstration of what we mean by short F1 in boltoniae and a relatively longer F1 in bidentis.
Yep.
And Droege, well, okay.
Well, we can look at the, now that we have bidentis on here, the abdomen is going to show up differently, but looking at the scutum, I don't know, does it have dark hairs on the scutum usually or not?
I don't think so.
Like, no. So, yeah, but if you...
Yeah, it does not. Yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah, if you look
it shouldn't.
At the abdomen, you'll see it presents just a visual. So a lot of times you can go like, I don't know necessarily how to key things out, but like the visual on it is like, oh, this is different. So here, if you look at the lower tergite, you can see it's just chock-a-block full of dark hairs. In fact, this almost doesn't even have a band anymore. Is that your generally the vibe on from your specimens?
Mm-hmm. And also the galea in bidentis seem to be dependably largely shiny.
All right, I think this might be out here, so let's take a quick look at it.
So the very tips may be shagreen, but yeah, so that's, you can see that's large, at least largely shiny.
I'm gonna,
I guess.
So there are paths to identifying them, but you're going to be looking at minute structures. And like Mike said, you know, what you really would like is a long series of all of these, because you can make up stories about one in almost any way, particularly if it's, you know, slightly anomalous. And also backs up the notion of having your own collection with multiple specimens that you can reference back. Because always the end is, I'm going to now go from whatever guide you want, and I'm going to compare it to known specimens. And your eye tells you a whole lot more than words in lots of cases. All right, so we could take a quick look at wheeleri here. I'm not remembering, again, because it's just not one I see, but we've got the specimen here.
It's part of that group about illatus, subillatus, and wheeleri all have T2 with a very few punctures. Basal. Okay, go ahead.
I just want to show. Here's this much more subtle dark.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, you know, it's like the one we saw initially. That was, you know, it was pretty obvious from the side. But this is actually, these are dark hairs in there. And there's not many. But if you look closely as we roll through here, it's like, oh, yeah, the shafts are dark. And then there's light hairs elsewhere. But if you kind of, I'm just going to roll through there. Yeah. So
good demonstration there.
So that's a good one on the spectrum. So
that was wheeleri or
wheeleri, yes.
Yeah, which is where we are now.
Yeah. So
and what was the series that those are associated with?
Illatus, subillatus, and wheeleri often get confused because of what Sam's about to show you. Let's see if that there are relatively few punctures and hardly any really, usually between the medial fascia and the base of the tergite.
Yeah, so this area here, which in the females, I find it much easier to see this than in the males, but we're not talking about females.
Are you about to show that again?
Yeah, I'm trying to get a different angle on it. See if we can get it for us. Yeah, so that's probably about as good as we get there, but you can see there's no pitting there. Again, in the female, this shows up really well. Actually, let me see if I yeah, I've got a female wheeler. Let me just put that on just so that people see that a little bit better. Some wings are a little bit in the way. Yeah, so the wing is slightly in the way, but in the females in particular, in Melissodes, so sometimes this is relatively heavily pitted. Sometimes there's small pits, often with hairs coming out of them. So again, pay attention. And this is basically, there are no pits here. And that subillatus, illatus, and then I guess wheeleri here are good examples of a place where there's no pitting in that spot. And then some like boltoniae, it's not like they've got a million pits there. We might as well show it.
But comparatively, it's
but so don't expect dramatic differences. But you look at we have a boltoniae specimen which are going away here in a little bit. Back to Minnesota. We should see something that in the right off the bat kind of looks the same, but when you start dialing in here, you see, oh, there's little pits throughout, and oh, there's dark hairs coming out of those and things like that. So again, with a little bit of experience, these things are more obvious. So again, rim of the tergite, I think that's T2, and then you can see that there are pits throughout there. And the other one, there were nada. You can also look at and contrast how dark the hairs are up there on the scutum in this one. it's relatively sparse, but those are much chunkier dark hairs. So by doing those, again, you can often pick these things up by inspection, and you just are sorting, resorting, and resorting big groups of Melissodes by eye first. I find very useful, rather than trying to take Melissodes 1, keying it out, and then being frustrated. You know, I think morpho sorting is good.
So wheeleri males also have a very short F1, very similar to
Yep.
boltoniae.
Let me let's pull out some other. You mentioned druriellus. That's one. When you get up to like into New England, for example, you kind of run out of Melissodes, but druriellus is one that goes to the north there, and so this one actually is from Maine. But one of the things that I think we'll see is that the F1 is also relatively large compared to the ones that we were just looking at.
What species?
This is druriellus. So,
Getting it? Yeah.
yeah, there we go. Lower one. So it's not as dramatic as bidentis, but it's something that I use when I'm like struggling.
And in this case, F2 is relatively shorter than in some other species. So what that means is the ratio between F1 and F2 is basically 1/5.
Yeah.
And even though F1, you could arguably say, well, that's maybe a little broader than it is long. But when you compare F1 to F2, I mean, and you can say it's, that's not 1/8. That's much more than that. So that relationship, F1 in itself is important, but the relationship between F1 and F2 can often be equally or more important in some species. And druriellus is one of those, which is a real common northern species.
Yeah, you can see no yellow on the mandible. And when we look, it's got, is it entirely white on the thorax and head?
It varies incredibly. It's one of those species that sometimes it's dark, sometimes it's light, sometimes it's in between. And that's true. It's true of the females too. The pubescence overall on the body varies quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, range wide. There are no subspecies that I don't think that have ever been described, but it's just one of those species that just, in terms of pubescence, varies a lot.
Whatever subspecies mean. Is there anything else that I can't remember? And it seems like it's the antennal segments that are key on this one, but are there other?
Well, there is. It's difficult to show, but there is a particular sheen or appearance of the integument on T2. It's very hard to that seems to be consistent in the males, in that it isn't bright and shiny, and there aren't any hairs on the apical areas of T2, but it has a particular appearance, and I know that doesn't help anybody, but it's one of those things that's hard to describe. But the apical areas of T2 on druriellus do not have hairs or punctures. They're short, and sometimes overlapping hairs kind of fall across, but the actual apical area themselves are mostly pitless and hairless.
Yeah.
See, now what you're seeing is overlapping hairs.
Yeah.
That are so, but there are no pits.
Yep. Yeah, it seems to be like when keying out druriellus, it's like the last thing to fall out. Oh, it must be. And then I look at the antennal segments. And thankfully, it's, mostly northern. There's not so many other things to worry about. And the males, though, are pretty distinct. All right. We probably have time for one last thing here before our end is over. What do you have a particular one you want we should show them?
Yep. Today I don't need to shut it down exactly at 2, so we have a little bit of flexibility.
Okay.
Well, in the east, is there something in the east maybe that's super common that we haven't talked about?
Well, we can look at denticulatus last time.
We did not, I don't think.
Yeah. So it's actually what a nice one to end with, because it is really easy, I think.
I agree.
So, and it's like, oh yeah, we know that. So it's all about the clippius. Denticulatus, yeah. Formerly denticulata.
It's one of the ironweed specialists.
Oh, what else is an ironweed? Or is it Vernoni?
Boltoniae, yeah.
Oh, and I don't think we get that in the east at all. Do we?
I'm not sure. I think there might be some records, but in the Midwest, it's both denticulatus and Vernoni are relatively common and key out together.
But does Vernoni have this? Holy moly!
It's got more yellow, but they're both variable in terms of yellow on the extent of yellow on the clypeus. Both have extremely densely shagreened gallium, way more than any other Melissodes.
Right. See, I've got a series here. These are very common. Again, if you hit ironweed. I don't know why my lighting is blowing out here, but what we're looking for and at is the fact that you have instead of yellow, you have white, and instead of going all the way to the rim of the clypeus, I'm going to get another specimen that's not all grouped up. It goes only part way up. Sometimes it's halfway.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I've ever seen one that went all the way up.
I never have either.
Now let's try this one here.
And denticulatus is another one, the male of which has extremely short F1. Really super short. As short as any of them, really.
Seems like the microscope has decided to...
It's conspired against you.
Look, it's in focus. Let's see if we can... But again, and often there is that little point at the top of the light area.
Yeah, that shows the dark margin of the clypeus. Yep. And there aren't many Melissodes that have that in the Midwest or in the East.
Yeah, I think apicatus also.
Yep.
Recessed areas. I don't think I have any more males right here. Females, tricky group because they kind of blend in with illata, subillata, but they do have nice hairs if they're not covered in pollen. That because they have a little S-shaped curve to them. But again, you got to see that, and it's well, when we get into the females, we can show some nice S-shaped curve. But a lot of times, they're filled with pollen, and you can't see these things. So
we've mentioned the denticulatus and Vernoni are both ironweed specialists, and I mean other Melissodes might be found at ironweed, but not to the extent that those two are. So if you pick up Melissodes collecting pollen, if it's female, on ironweed, the odds are very good that it's denticulatus or vernonii. Males, of course, don't collect pollen, so you can't use that. But I mean, those two species are the most common species of Melissodes at ironweeds, in my experience.
Yeah,
So
I almost never see anything else.
Yeah, so that's a case where, you know, the host or the host plant can be very helpful.
Yeah, it's probably got really nasty, you know, secondary compounds or something in the pollen.
Yeah, cattle never eat it. Yeah, it's a weed in pastures, at least in most of the Midwest, because nothing eats it.
Yeah. So are there any questions, or Mike, do you have anything? I think we're at our 2.
Yeah.
Is there anything else to add or mention?
There's nothing in the chat, but people can unmute at this point.
I think what we've done is we've kind of articulated and shown what the different, I'm going to get the screen here, the different approaches are to, you know, antenna, hair color, presence of pits, and you know, you're just going to have to sort of parse through those, and the shagreening on the tongue. I think we've covered the characters reasonably well. We have the agilis, trinodis mystery thing there, which I was particularly happy to talk to you about.
If anybody, I don't know if anybody's still listening, but anybody that uses my key, the only way that gets better is by people making comments, criticisms, or suggestions. So anybody that uses that key and finds things that are questionable or don't make sense or can be added, I'm always happy to receive that kind of information.
Right. We're both in the same. We're all in the same boat, and if we were resistant to that, then, you know, our keys are probably not very good. And the nice thing about computers is we can change them. Discover Life is always as up to date as the day before. And I should point out that we've been expanding the guides to the west slowly. We've got all the distributions ready to go all the way to from the Dakotas down for specimens in the guides. And then we're gradually adding in the species that weren't in the original one. So always progress.
Oh, I did forget to make an announcement at the beginning. Ingrid Carmine, who I think is still on in the participants, has been sending me so many wonderful pictures of Alaskan bumblebees. Oh. And I'm a little behind, but they will be going up on the teams and eventually in Discover Life. So thank you, Ingrid. And, you know, look for them under the pictures in the files.
And I could show you, Claire, anytime you want on how to upload them to Discover Life.
I am aware we're just a little busy with the class development and getting through Xeric.
And we're also in discussions with some. We're also in discussions with a couple of Alaska folks about completing all the guides for Alaska and Yukon, because first of all, they don't have that many species, only 100 and some, and so we're hoping that it's a relatively short lift. And this goes for anyone who wants to add species to Western guides to complete a particular group.
I was just corrected. Those are actually from Washington. I think I do have some Alaskan bees from someone else, and I'm just mixing it up.
Got it.
Laurel asked, to what email address or addresses should we send out comments on the guide?
For Mike, what is your email address?
It's my last name, ARDUSER.Michael@gmail.com.
And then ours, you can email to Claire, because you have her email address, because she sends out little messages.
I see Ingrid unmuted. Do you want to contribute?
No, I was just gonna say that they were from Washington, not Alaska, but you already got that.
Thank you, darling. And Nancy asks, was wondering where Tepensa?
Desponsa? The thistle?
Nancy, unmute.
This,
Maybe we already talked about it last week, but about trinodis versus tepaneca.
Ah, that's how you pronounce it.
Oh, we did
oh.
not.
Yeah, I would say those are night and day. Yeah, if we're talking, they're in two different subgenera. Not that we didn't really talk about subgenera, but Tepaneca or Tepaneca has the galea completely brightly shiny, completely.
Okay.
Always. And Trinodis always has a little bit of tessellation. No, but in both sexes.
Okay.
Also,
Thank you.
a vibe that I get from looking at Tepaneca, which is mostly a southern thing, is
Right.
that the hair bands on the abdomen are unusually straight.
Yep.
So it's difficult to quantify that, but basically they don't. So normally there's an arc to the hair bands where they move towards the rim at the lateral sides, and Tepaneca, I don't know how that relationship works, but it looks like they're just straight across.
And quite narrow, relatively speaking, too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay, thanks.
yeah, the furthest north Tepaneca occurs is that I know of is basically southern Illinois. So I don't. If you're in Michigan or upper Midwest, you won't find it.
Yeah, we don't have any for Maryland. I'm not sure about Virginia, but yeah, the southern coastal plain bee.
While we have you on Discover Life, if you use the menu differences function between male communis and male comptoides, it's confusing what the differences are. Can we look at that before you go?
So male comptoides versus communis. Was that the question?
Yep. And Eric, you can always unmute if you have more clarifying questions.
Yeah. So actually, Mike and I were talking about this earlier today. So Mike, you want to go through those?
Yeah, and we are talking males.
Yes. What I'm seeing is if you look at abdominal T2 and T3 position, if you read it, it starts with band of hair significantly set back from apical rim, especially on the center. This is for communis. And then you go over to the other species and it starts that same way, but then there's also hair bands absent. So what's confusing is it reads both have the same beginning. Even the next section there, let's see, what are they talking about? Abdomen T2 color of inner band hair. It says all light, all are partially dark, and then the other species all are partially dark. Is it both things can happen, or it's just a little confusing to me?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the Discover Life key, I'd have to take a look at the. Are we bringing it up here?
Yeah, I just screen shared.
Okay. So what you're looking at is a differences tab. So in the on the left-hand side are characters or the states of characters that communis has, and on the right-hand side are states of characters that comptoides have. But what you're looking at are scorings. So in communis, what you're seeing is it's only scored for band of hair set significantly back, and in comptoides it's scored for that too, but it's also scored for hair bands absent, just because sometimes you get in some comptoides a very sparse to lack of a band. So it doesn't mean that they have both. It means that sometimes you get a specimen that has largely absent of a hairband, and sometimes it has hair bands. And so it's not very illuminating. There should be, I think, so that's designed just to not allow people not to make mistakes when they're choosing characters. If you scroll down, I think there's a comptoides, a detailed one. So this is the one to pay attention to here. So it's basically a character you see on the far left. It says M. communis versus M. comptoides versus M. tepaneca. So there, it's also including tepaneca. You're only seeing the parts for communis and comptoides. So that should, oh look, very, very magical. So these can be very wordy, but they're designed to include information that isn't, that's more relative, like bigger than, less than, more than, greater than, that you wouldn't put in a normal dichotomous key. So I haven't looked at these in particular, but this would be the one to concentrate on in terms of separating out the two species. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, so a lot of times when after you get used to using Discover Life Guide, you go like, oh my God, I've got this. Is that communis or is that comptoides? You would go to the guide, click on has, and jump right down to the, most detailed differentiation between the two as, your best strategy.
Okay, thank you.
While we're here, I'm just going to take the opportunity to remind people, like we use the has a lot in class. But if you really want to get everything, you can hit characters, and that'll show every single thing that we've scored it for.
Mm-hmm.
Which, a lot of those will drop out because like all of the regions. But if that's another tool for you, just while we're here.
Yeah. If you do differences, it only shows characters in which the two species differ. So you don't get all the scorings. You just get a character that has some kind of difference. So you can see that sometimes it's just one species is scored for more than one state and the other is only for one state.
Yeah. So in that one, you need to click multiple pieces.
Yeah. In general, our philosophy is to score things for characters that you might mistake them for in addition to what they have, and then resolve the species in some, very detailed this versus that kind of thing, to be conservative. So we're not doing a morphological study. We're not doing a phylogeny or anything. So our goal is to get you to an ID and in as few as mistakes as possible. So if we think you're going to mess up a character for a species because it's a little ambiguous, then we're going to score it for, more than one state. So for example, sometimes the antennal lengths, if it's like right about, like, let's say it's a little bit more than half, well, we might actually score it for half or more than half, so that, again, you have a chance, like if you mistake it for one of the states that we think that in general, if you knew what you were doing, let's say, you wouldn't do, but and the reason to do that is like, why not? Because there are other characters often that are really clear in separating them, and often we have a very wordy section. So we tend to be conservative in our scoring, as well as you should be conservative in your scoring when you're using the guide. If that makes sense. So it's a different mentality from dichotomous keys.
Okay, there's nothing else in the chat. How do we feel? Are we
onward?
Satisfied?
Look at more Melissodes. We're all learning in this bus. I mean, there's more and more vein traps out there, that's for sure. So we're all going to have to deal with Melissodes, and hopefully we'll start settling some of this out.
And it's worth noting that the better prepared those specimens are, the easier it is. I mean, when they're all gummed up and just pulled out of the alcohol or whatever pinned.
The worst is glycol.
Yeah, no doubt, God, yeah. So make them look as good as you can, as long as if time permits.
Yeah, don't let your undergrads do it without a lot of supervision. And then also, just as a hint, when doing glycol, you want to soak them in a heavy concentration of dish detergent. Dawn is always the best, at least it's consistent. And I use warm water and you soak it in there before you go do any washing, because there is glycol in the body cavity, and you can, relatively quickly get rid of surface propylene glycol. But then when you start processing it and drying it and tumbling it around, that stuff starts oozing out of the spiracles, and it just mats everything back down again. So it's not trivial. It's a great compound for a bunch of different reasons, but it's, you really have to up your game. And remember, when Mike and I look at your specimens and they're all ratty, we are thinking bad thoughts about you. All right, well, on that lovely note, maybe we're done, unless there's more comments or something.
Nope, we're just chatting about how hard Melissodes were and pronunciations in the chat. So nothing worth recording.
Sam, are you going to do females next, or not?
Yeah, and I would love to have you on if you want to continue this. We'll invite you, and then, but you don't have a female key at this point, but obviously.
Yeah, well, I've been working on it, and okay. It might be done by next week.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
first draft, which is dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good group to send things out to, and then they can trial it, and that's part of the free, I should note, course that you're taking, that you give feedback. So.
Okay.
All right.
That's Sam.
And then, so Claire, does that work that we do females next week?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We can. We have 2 weeks free until we're gonna have Lucia show their genus guide.
Okay, and then we're coordinating behind the scenes for a basically a continental view of bumblebees. So we've got people from Central America on up, trying to work out the schedules. So that'll be fun.
And we might want to consider planning way ahead for Andrina at this point. So if you're on or have a friend, let us know.
Yeah, there's several months.
Yeah, we should plan ahead for, to go from August to Christmas.
We'll relax a little bit with a couple other, like Caliopsis or something.
Yeah, there'll be some in between. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for everything, Claire.
Yep.
Huzzah.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Yep. Thanks, Mike.